Hello, we're going to be discussing how you write when you're part of a research team. So this is just a basic writing overview. So the first thing you need to understand about writing with a research team is that each of you are going to come in with a specific set of skills and at different levels. So writing really is and should be considered a developmental process. And I feel like this is the best way to kind of describe it, that early writers struggle with what to say. They just don't even really begin to know how to put the words together the way they need to say them. And then intermediate student writers, they don't really know how to say it. They use too much passive voice or things like that. And then advanced writers have too much to say and they don't know how to edit it down. And so these are all parts of it. So let's go through each one of these. Early writers, they have strengths and weaknesses no matter what your stage is. So there's definitely ways that almost anybody can be a part of a writing team. We all have something to contribute. One of the biggest issues I see with early writers is they don't cite anything. If you find yourself writing things like, everyone knows that, cite it. Everybody knows it, find the research to say it. Anything that is a statement of fact should be cited. And, you just can't assume that everyone really is aware or that there's a universal truth. Remembering that almost everything we talk about is theory anyway. One of the big things that early writers will tend to do is they come up with their ideas and their beliefs about something, and they're looking for the literature to support what they have to say. Instead of reading the literature critically to build a theory out of it, they're trying to get the literature to support their already pre-existing theories. Also, a lot of early writers don't really understand how to read the statistical analyses or the results or methods section. So they just read the intro and the lit review, and then they read the discussion section. And then a lot of times in the discussion section, they do kind of ignore the fact that these discussions are based off of, there's always faulty information in every study. They don't know how to critique. Maybe the sample size was too small. Maybe the instrumentation used was not reliable enough. Or the scores provided by the instrumentation used was not reliable enough. Or, any of these sort of things, until you understand how the data was obtained and the findings that came from it, whether or not they are accurate, that's problematic. And then the next one is don't write based off of a theory. I already had maybe 2 or 3 things published when I had something kicked back to me from a publisher that said, you don't have a theory here. And I remember thinking, I do have a theory. My theory is, I think in that particular piece had to do with which personality types predict IQ. And I thought, oh, okay, well, my theory is personality and IQ are related. But that's not a theory, that's a hypothesis. Well, then, let me think. Maybe it's, there's big five personality types, that each of the 5 personality types, that my theory is that maybe one of them or 2 of them might be related and others aren't. That's not a theory either. That's a research question. Theory would say something like, what is the theory of personality anyway? So how is this big 5 theoretical approach? What is it? What does it mean? And then we're talking about IQ. It's not just a score. What is our theory behind what is cognitive development? And then, do I have a connection why I think theoretically that the personality theories that exist and the cognitive and IQ and intellectual development theories exist? So maybe there is some sort of combined developmental theoretical approach that I should be thinking about. And early writers, they just don't see the theory. They get confused between theory, research questions, and research hypothesis. But they do have some strengths. They're not burnt out yet. The literature's new and there's really cool stuff in it and they get really excited and they're not seeing the same quotes over and over again. So that's one thing. The other thing, and it's not really in here, but it should be, is sometimes I will send my students out to go and do, reviews of the literature, and they come back with sources I might not have found because I use the same terms over and over again to search because I found those to be effective for me. But they may word it a different way. Or they might start looking into literature I wasn't thinking about looking at, maybe sociological literature, or anthropological, or medical. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, so you've brought me something cool, exciting, and that I wouldn't have found otherwise. So, what do early writers do as part of a research team? Well, they do a good job going out and finding the literature. They can do something called abstracting the literature. We're going to talk about what that looks like in a little bit. And they're really good at kind of bouncing off the theory. You can talk about theory. It's also talking about research questions and those kind of things. They can be really important on the front end. Intermediate writers have their strengths and weaknesses too. One of the things that I find is that a lot of people will discuss themselves as being advanced writers when they're still just intermediate writers. And I'll talk about that in half a second. So they still focus too much on trying to find research that matches their beliefs, but they are starting to integrate multiple sources, and they're starting to describe specific studies. And that's one of the things. Early writers will say something like, you know, children enjoy video games. And then, that sort of in between early and intermediate will say children enjoy video games, cite Jones 2012. But a true intermediate writer to an advanced writer will say Jones surveyed 2,000 children about their video game play. On the enjoyment scale of the child happiness inventory, there was a 85% of them said that they enjoyed video games, right? And so it's not just, all right, I've made a statement and I'm finding something to prove my statement. You are describing the specific studies and integrating it. So by this group, by then they're starting to have a research question, but they're still struggling with the difference between research and theory, research questions and theory. This is the big issue that they start to get arrogant. They don't really think they need feedback, and they get a lot of times really frustrated. I remember when I was an early intermediate writer, I was still in graduate school working on my dissertation and thesis and all those kind of things. Not thesis, but dissertation, or even just research papers for classes, and they would give me feedback, and I would read it and say, okay, and then move on. No, feedback this is the opportunity for you to integrate it, not just into this paper, but other and future papers. Take it, read it, and absorb it as part of this process. But as you do more and more, you're like, oh, I should have got an A on this paper, and I didn't. And so a little funny story. I remember writing a paper for one of my specialist level classes, and I remembered not doing, like, I got a C on that paper, and I remember being really angry because I had felt like I had gotten a good grade on that paper, and then I got a C on it. I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, I ran across the paper when I was going through and shredding some files and things, and I reread it from my own perspective, and I'm surprised I got a C. It was terrible. It was so horrible. One of my references was Kiwanis Weekly, not anything peer reviewed. So this is the thing. I remember being angry with my professor for not giving me the grade I thought I deserved. Instead of focusing on her comments about this is not a peer reviewed source, you shouldn't be using this. So these are the kind of things that happens with intermediate writers. Role in a research team. They can do the planning and conceptualizing of the study, helping with data collection and writing. They know how to abstract literature, same thing that the early writers can do. And they've started to begin to put together their findings in a way that presents the information in what I call an argumentative format. A lot of what we have to do in our literature reviews and everything is think about ourselves as attorneys, building a case that, of course, this study had to be done because here's the hole in the literature. And of course, these were the right ways to do this study. And then, of course, our findings um, were accurate. And then, of course, here's what they meant. And then, of course, we had problems. And here they are, and we admit them. But overall, the study contributes. Then advanced writers. So advanced writers begin to look for information that supports and contradicts their own beliefs. They're exploring and investigating all of this. They start to look for multiple sources in a really structured way. They have an overarching theory. They look for feedback. They want people to read their work before they get it submitted. And then they can write in generalities and in specifics. So researchers find that children enjoy video games versus something specific like Jones's study and of 224 undergraduates found. Their role in a research team is bigger. They can do everything from start to finish, plan the study, conceptualize it, find the literature, integrate the information, build an argument. And this is something else that's really valuable. They can lead others to be better writers. So I'm going to let you know, I probably published 5 or 6 things, maybe more, before I was really what I consider an advanced writer. I can tell you the exact project where all of a sudden it all clicked together. I'd been a professor for maybe 5 years when all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay. These are all the parts. One of the things that advanced writers will do, this whole getting feedback, sometimes we'll submit to a journal that we know is above the quality of the study that we did. And then because those folks will give us peer-reviewed feedback, that will allow us to fix things and then submit it to the journal that we think we want. I'm married to a proofreader, and he reads a large majority of the stuff I do before I send it out for publication, because he will constantly check, and find just small writing errors or just ways to make the writing more powerful. I might, if it's something that it's an area that is a little bit outside of what I usually do, I might have somebody else read it. Someone else I know who's a specialist in this particular project. But here's one of the benefits of writing in a team. If you're writing in a team, you can all read it, catch errors, mistakes, read through it. Basic writers can read the work of advanced writers and give them feedback, because there's always something you may miss. So this is one of my favorite quotes. In fact, you usually will find this on my door. This is not the exact quote, but it's close enough. It's Blaise Pascal. I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. That's one of the things that intermediate writers really, really struggle with. And that is, how do you say what you need to say and not just eat up the page with words? How do you use language in clear, concise methods? How do you do it? And that is a challenge. So I'm going to shift from just the concepts of the developmental nature to the process of writing. So we're going to go through the 3 stages, which are kind of pre-writing, and then post-writing. So pre-writing, the most fun thing you do in pre-writing is sitting down and just brainstorming with each other. Just, if you have a research team sitting down and saying, what are you interested in? You get the big, huge topic. And then you say, okay, so, I'm interested in technology and aggression. So let's go through and figure out how are all the different ways that we can conceptualize that, and what are each of the people that I'm working with interested in. So for instance, I have a doctoral student who's interested in school to prison pipeline. So she's really interested in the aggression side of it, and maybe personal experiences and exposures and characteristics that are related to this aggressive aspect. I have another student who is interested in, you know, this sense of dominance and aggression. And so we have that. I have another student that I work with who's really interested in how do you quantify aggression using video game methodology. I have another student who might be interested in, looking at what are the different types of aggression and what are some interventions that might be able to be implemented, technology based or non technology based. And so you see, there's a huge topic, and you sit down and you get everybody's ideas of what they might want to do, and then you build your study off of that. You start narrowing it down. Okay, so you're interested in school to prison pipeline, and I'm interested in aggression. Let's get down to exactly how we're going to go through this. And so you could have a single data collection wherein that maybe you collect a bunch of different data from rating scales or direct assessment or whatever you're doing, and you can collect a lot of data and use that data across multiple papers or studies. And so this is just something, planful. Be planful about your data collection. Instead of saying, I have this research question, I'm going to answer it. And then next time I have that research question, I'm going to answer that. No, that's not how you do it. So before you collect your data in all of this, you have to decide what's your theoretical approach. So for me, my theoretical approach behind aggression has to do with Bandura's social learning theory. And that has to do with Crick and Dodge have this whole thing about there being two types of aggression: proactive, which is cold and planful, and reactive aggression, which is hot and impulsive. And so that theoretical underpinning needs to be involved in all of the aspects of what I'm doing with this data collection. What's my goal for this study? Well, my goal is, in general, I want to figure out ways to assess for aggression and aggression related issues and develop interventions for aggression and aggression related issues. And what do I want my readers to learn? I want them to learn how to identify different types of aggression. What are some of the issues that maybe an individual has that led them to those types of aggression? What are some correlated issues that go along with aggression, and what are some tools that they can use to measure it and intervene. So research questions, you link your hypothesis to the practical application. You want your selected research questions to be clear, specific, and measurable, and it should always be linked back to the literature. So you don't build your research questions until you've done the literature review. You have to, at least, you may not have to have a perfect literature review that's all beautiful and whatever, but you need to have a firm understanding of the literature. You need to have read what's out there and start developing your hypothesis based off of that. And usually in literature, you're going to find one of two things: that there's a hole in the literature, there's something that has yet to be studied, or that there are studies that have been accepted as fact, when in fact you worry that maybe some of the methodology used was not best practice, and so you might do a replication study. So this shows kind of an example of what a good research question should look like. It should be specific, not general. It should be clear. And within the clarity, you should be able to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable and the data analysis method if you're doing a quantitative study. With a qualitative study, you need to identify the kind of qualitative method you're going to use. But because I'm a quantitative methodologist, I'm going to discuss quantitative more. So a bad research question, or I would say bad is the wrong way to say it, maybe an early writer's research question: is there more aggression in children that are in different socioeconomic groups or have different socioeconomic status? In this, you can't really tell what the independent variable and dependent variable or what kind of analysis you use. It looks like maybe because you're saying more aggression, maybe aggression, because that sounds quantifiable. And socioeconomic status, like how is that defined? So it's better if you are much more specific. How do teacher ratings of aggression differ for children in different socioeconomic groups. So we now know that teacher ratings of aggression are the dependent variable, and the independent variable are the different socioeconomic groups. And you can even identify from here exactly what's going on. So with once you have your research question, or part of your research question is determining which type of analysis that you're going to do. So in general, for statistics, we've got two different things we're looking at. Are there differences between X and Y, so pre-test and post-test, or whatever, or different socioeconomic groups or whatever? Or is there a relationship between something? Is there a relationship between, say, aggression and car accidents, right? And so these two things have different kinds of statistics. But in writing up your research question, if you say you're interested in differences, then these are the stats that are going to exist. ANOVAs, MANOVAs, t-tests, stuff like that, trend analysis. If you're interested in relationships, you're going to want one of these: correlation, regression, factor analysis, structural equation modeling. So this little note at the bottom kind of gives you a little bit more information. So when I said in the previous slide, it says, how do teacher ratings of aggression differ for children in different socioeconomic groups? Here at the bottom. So we know ratings of aggression. Okay, so ratings of aggression is going to be an interval data, right? It's going to be some sort of score. And so that tells you one thing. And then socioeconomic groups, that groups tells us it's a grouping variable, which means it's going to be, we're going to have maybe three different groups: low socioeconomic status, middle class, and wealth, or something like that. And so that tells us our dependent variable. And differ tells us that it's going to be one of these differences. And so we are going to be looking at mean differences between three levels of a single group, socioeconomics, and then we're going to be looking at that with a continuous data variable, which is going to be the aggression ratings. So there we go. That's what we have. And it's pretty straightforward here. So when I say that your research question tells you the analysis, this is what I'm talking about. In addition to all the other stuff, some pre-writing stuff that can help you. If you're doing your literature review, Google Scholar to me is a great place to start. Please note, for Florida State University students, Google Scholar is one of our databases that's available to us. And so I would recommend that you consider that. If you go into the databases from your house, and Google scholar.google.com is part of that, then you get a different set of results than you do if you just do scholar.google.com straight into your browser. And that is because though you get the same results, what you don't get from your home browser is on the right-hand side. It'll give you an indication of being able to just access the text for free. That access will show up if you do it through the databases. It does not show up necessarily for everything if you do it from just logging in from your home. In addition, another database I like is OneSearch. Some other things available if you don't have your APA manual right in front of you at any given time. Purdue OWL has a really nice description of certain APA rules. And the Mental Measurement Yearbook is a really great way for you to find instruments and evaluations on instruments. So if I was looking for the teacher assessment of aggression, I might look at Mental Measurement Yearbooks to find an assessment for aggression. So what are you looking for? Particularly when you're lit review, you're looking for peer-reviewed journals. Ideally, these are peer-reviewed journals where there is a results and methods section. You want stuff that's current, within 10 years, but sometimes you're going to have a seminal piece. So like you might find something even cited from 1947 or 1968. Again, Bandura in his learning theory the social learning theory that I'm interested in, my citation is not going to come from the last 10 years for him. It's going to be considerably older. And so that is part of what it's okay to cite one or two seminal pieces that are older. It's okay to cite maybe one or two pieces that are literature reviews. But really, the majority of your literature should come from peer-reviewed journal articles, not textbooks, that are data-based with the results and method sections embedded. So the next audio recording is going to start in the next section, which is going to be the nuts and bolts of writing each of the sections.